I'd like to call the November 28th Governing Board meeting to order, being held here at Jerry Rovey District Facility. Sorry, Mr. Rovey. Governing Board members present are Brian Parks. Paul Bixler is joining us via telephone. Paul Jensen, Michael Todd, myself, Mark Aguirre. Mr. Jensen, if you could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
It is recommended the Governing Board approve the regular agenda consistent with Board Policy BEDB and temporarily suspend Governing Board policy with which this agenda may be inconsistent.
Mr. President, I'd like to actually, if we could adjust or discuss agenda item 6.4. I have a concern about an open meeting violation. To my knowledge, no one on the board has asked for legal clarification or a question. As quoted in agenda item 6.4 and associated statute 38-43103, section A3, discussion or consideration for legal advice with the attorney of the public body. Like I said, to my knowledge, no one has asked for legal clarification, and there is nothing in the statute that would qualify for executive session. I'm requesting this agenda item be removed until proper notice and detailed legal clarification are addressed.
So again, I'm awaiting a motion to approve the regular agenda form.
I'll make a motion to approve the regular agenda consistent with Board Policy BEDB and temporarily suspend Governing Board policy with which this agenda may be inconsistent.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Brian?
Nay.
Paul?
Aye.
Michael?
Nay.
Ms. Bixler?
Aye.
I am also an aye. All those opposed? Brian?
Nay.
Michael?
Nay.
Show that the motion carried. 3-2. Item 2.1, Teacher Advisory Group.
President Aguirre, members of the board, if we could adjust the order of the administrative reports, the teacher advisory group member who would be joining us this evening is running a little bit late. So if we could start with 2.2.
I don't have an issue. Anyone? No? Please. Threat assessment procedure. Mr. Nuttall.
Mr. President, members of the governing board, just a few weeks ago, the governing board requested our procedures specific to threat assessment. I've provided a slide deck here that's being pulled up now, as well as some supporting forms. What I'd like to do is just take a little bit to go through our process and our procedures, what the purpose is, and kind of our sequence. And then I'd free it up to any questions and things of that sort. Just very quickly, as we define threat, it's an expression or intent to physically harm oneself, others, or property. And certainly it can be spoken, written, or gestured. Threats that they can be directly or indirectly expressed to a potential victim or others, and they may be explicit or implied. And so I just wanted to define what that is, because we have it clearly defined here, and then our purpose follows. So the purpose of the actual threat assessment and the process and procedures that we have is specific to do two things. Number one is determine the level of risk to oneself or others, or any property, and also, when appropriate, to initiate any disciplinary interventions pertaining to our investigation. So we conduct an investigation. If it results in warranted discipline, then we do that. Obviously, student safety and well-being is at the top of our priorities. So with those two purposes in mind, we then go through into some procedures. And the first and foremost, we have established that once there is a threat that is identified, we evaluate and respond, obviously, in a very timely manner. So it's important that we involve the identified members, and we've identified specific members who are assigned to perform specific duties to evaluate the legitimacy of the threat, the viability of the threat, should one actually occur. And so we determine whether or not it poses a threat of violence. And that just simply means, do students potentially have the intent to do it? Truly, do they have the intent? Do they have the means to carry it out? So we look at those two things. That's where we start. And so the first kind of set in our sequence is that when they indicate, by definition, just as I just mentioned moments ago, the intent to cause physical or injury or damage to someone else or the school in general, and whether or not there's damage to property. So if it's a threat to the school or the harm to any of our school property, it also results in a threat assessment. So it is important to note that the threat to harm oneself is a little bit different than the threat to harm someone else or school property. And we have a little bit of a different route that we take specific to that. So I just wanted to make sure that I noted a couple of those situations that do happen from time to time where our professional staff evaluates those particular components of that. Obviously, there's a referral to the administrative team, the nurse, a behavior interventionist, school counselor, and or school psychologist for some assessments specific to suicide and what those appropriate interventions are if it's harm to oneself. In that particular case, we've established threat management teams, and they're not specifically initiated when it's specific to harming oneself. So once a staff member is made aware of a threat, obviously they communicate immediately with our administrator. And our administrator reviews, obviously a description of what the threat was. And it could be drawings, it could be certain lists of students that are targeted, it could be notes. In the case of a weapon, where there's a threat to have a weapon, we evaluate whether or not there's the legitimacy of a weapon, and we take disciplinary action first and determine threat later. Okay, so that's something that we have to make sure that we initiate. So at that point in time, site administration and our counselor, they review the data that they collect based off of that description, and then they report to the staff member, and then we meet with the student immediately to determine what our next steps. This is essentially an initial interview. And so, as I mentioned before, does it fit the definition of a threat, which is bullet point 2? Do they have the means? Is there a specific target? Have they identified a particular plan? Do they truly have the desire? And then do they have the ability physically to carry it out? So in some cases, second grade students may say something that they don't have any of these things. They oftentimes might say something that they don't have any of these bullets. Next, if there's a potential harm that does exist, at this point in time, the threat management team is initiated. So we begin the process of bringing all of our team members involved. Primarily, the school counselor and the site administrator will work collectively together to begin this threat assessment process. If there's no potential harm for exists, then there could still be some student discipline. So where a threat is made, whether or not a threat assessment carries it out its entire process does not mean that there's not disciplinary action taken. So, we take all of the threats very seriously. Whether or not there's actually a threat is determined by this threat management team. So let's say in the case that there is a potential for harm. So the student is interviewed using our specific interview forms and supplemental interview forms. And in many cases, where this is we have some prescribed questions and some follow-up questions to get to kind of the root cause of why a student may have initiated this threat, and it has been decided for a potential use of harm. We still collect data from all of our assigned team members. So part of our process is we look at attendance data, we look at grades, we look at discipline, we look at whether or not the student qualifies for special services, we look at any health information. It may not be relevant, but it's certainly important to collect and gather all of that data because there could be some other signs that lead to what the potential for harm actually is. Additional information from teachers can be provided. So in the case of middle school teachers, they have multiple classes throughout the day, and so they may have made a threat in one particular case. We collect data from all of the teachers to determine whether or not there's any additional or patterns of behavior. At that point in time, we also interview the parent, and there's a prescribed interview form for that parent, and we try and stick as closely as we possibly can to that. The reason is because we don't want to provide leading questions, right? So we want to just make sure we have very sound, secure, standard set of questions. Still, if there's a potential for harm, we gather all of the information from the student interviews, the parent interviews, all of the supplemental information, whether or not there was drawings or lists and things of that sort. And the threat management team reconvenes all the people who the principal has assigned to then provide some additional information to determine what type of category it is. And so I've defined the categories here for you. Category 1 is obviously the highest level of risk. So at that point in time, we have prescribed actions to take if there's imminent risk for harm. Now, remember, if there's a weapon involved, this has already taken place. So we still follow the process because there are other prescribed behaviors that the school staff has to take into account. Secondly, there's a moderate risk for harm, also prescribed behaviors, low and no risk for harm. And each category, as I mentioned, has some actions based off of the evidence provided. The team also will complete a safety or protection plan. So in the event that there is a threat and there are other students that may have been targeted, or if the school buildings have been targeted, then we put some safety measures in place for a protection plan for that student themselves, other students involved, and certainly school property. And we are able then to take all of our information and upload that information into our student information system Synergy. And then reports are obviously provided to me, and I'll be involved pretty heavily throughout the whole process. What I did was I created a flow chart here, which is kind of a snapshot view of our sequence of events, so that all of our staff can really understand if this is kind of filled with if-then statements, right? So if this happens, then we go to this measure. If this happens, then we go to this measure. We met with all of our principals a couple of weeks ago to review. And, you know, I'll just say that the threat management team and the threat assessment component, this is a foundational component. Every single threat assessment that comes through is handled very seriously, and obviously there are no two threats that are the same. So it's a malleable product dependent upon the circumstance and the situation. So that's kind of a brief overview. I just also wanted to include the fact that I included in your board packets a list of all of our forms that we use. So at this point in time, we have paper copies of these forms that are handwritten. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is capture one particular threat in one case in one document as our staff navigates it. So what I included for you in your board packet was Google Sheets. So they fill out Form 1 and it notes where they fill the form out. Then it goes to the next step and there's specific staff assigned and drop-down menus. And it's shared with the threat assessment team. So everybody has live, up-to-date information in real time so that they can see and assess those situations as they go through. We're not quite to the point where we're ready to launch these individual forms, but all of the content from the paper forms that are written is still the same information. We're collecting it all. We're just trying to increase our efficiencies specific to that. So really we want to have our total threat assessment and a determination of the level of risk conducted within 72 hours. Okay. Now, that could mean that a student is not with us on the campus at the moment because there's disciplinary measures taken. That could be that there are other interventions that are still taking place with our staff members, primarily our administrative teams and our school counselors and our teachers. But I just wanted to share with you, just that brief overview and answer any questions that you might have.
Can you add a little bit more information about how law enforcement is part of that process?
Sure. Law enforcement is always contacted following our discipline matrix for specific items that are listed in there. So many cases we don't have the choice to contact law enforcement. Quite frankly, about 90% of all of our discipline matrix that has something to that level requires us to communicate with law enforcement. When we communicate with law enforcement, one of two things typically happens. One is they would like to participate in the threat assessment with us. And in many cases, law enforcement agencies have their own threat assessment. So as an example, we may conduct our own site-based threat assessment. And in the event that law enforcement, let's say that there was a threat of a weapon, our law enforcement officers will go to the residence and perform their own threat assessment. And then they conduct that threat to determine the viability of that threat from a law enforcement side. When we interview a parent over the phone, or we interview a student over the phone or in person, we may not get that information. But when an officer is at the home and can conduct that, do you have weapons present in the home? Can we take a look around? They have a process by which they conduct a very thorough law enforcement related threat assessment. We share that information, determined to make sure cross-reference that those things are accurate.
Ms. Bixler, any questions?
Yeah, Mr. President, thank you very much. Ms. Nettle, I understand that every threat is unique to certain aspects of it. As far as the actual call for outside agencies' involvement, do we have a protocol as to who makes that call?
If it is specific to weapons of any kind, then the principal of the school or the assistant principal will make that call to contact law enforcement prior to contacting even me, because there's a level of timeliness that is specific to that.
Thank you, Ms. Nettle.
Brian, any questions?
Yeah, you said that you collect data. How's that data handled, and how's that data handled more long-term through, say, escalation process? Meaning, how is that data revisited? How are we using that data to take a look at, okay, well, we have the same thing, or it's escalating over time? Because we can kind of almost foreshadow what's next if we're keeping it on. And my question is do we have something that helps us do that?
I don't know if we have a specific data collection and measurement, I don't want to say device, but method by which we collect it. So essentially our school counselor and our administrative team collect all of the information. Are there check marks to see? I don't know if there's that per se just yet. However, what I will say is there are interventions that are provided for students of all kinds, right? I mean, it doesn't only pertain to threats, but in this particular case, if there are threats made, there are specific interventions. Many of those are prescribed. And so we collect data through our interventions to then provide some additional oversight and support for the students as they need
Has
it.
anybody looked to see if there's you always throw this as a software solution, or is there something that would help us?
I would add that in the old days, we would do a threat assessment. We'd stick it all in a paper folder, right? And then if we had continuing concerns about the student, or we kind of were watching the kids we'd done previous threat assessments for, we had all that information in a folder. So now that is being added to the student information system. So if a student then continued to have maybe other kinds of, maybe they were getting into fights, let's say, or something else that was some type of an aggressive behavior, we still have that record and all that goes with it. So if the principal changes over, the counselor changes over, the student changes to a different school even, we still have that information from that initial threat assessment, and that becomes part of the record so that we can monitor that student over time. But I don't know if that really answers exactly what you were looking for.
It may do us some good to just take a look out, because there's my previous life, I actually helped build some of these AI systems, and there are good systems out there that are predictive, and it could probably really help us get an idea, maybe almost a heads up to who needs some intervention before we have to have intervention, just from a helpful basis instead of having to wait till we have an incident. So might be useful just to see if there's something that we can look into that'll help us. Thank you.
Jensen?
Yeah, thank you for the information. Could you elaborate a little bit more about after the threat assessment and things that kind of calm down? What support and resources do we provide to the student to help them?
Sure. I think that there's some prescribed assistance through our counselor's logic model. And so we have a school counselor's logic model to address very high level needs. The other piece that we have been working on is a tiered intervention approach, right? So we have behavior interventionists that are here. We've posted for behavior support specialists to coordinate with our school counselors to observe observe data, say in classrooms or in unstructured times, to determine, patterns of behaviors or predictive types of things. We also evaluate, just generally speaking, we evaluate our discipline through, where are the preponderance by grade or by age group of where discipline comes into play, right? Where did things happen in unstructured time so we can put additional resources to avoid it? But specifically in terms of other interventions, there are partnership groups with outside agencies that can provide some additional support for students in need, specific to other types of behavior management, behavior plans, types of things that we can incorporate. Certainly in the case of special education services, if a student should qualify, there are things like behavior intervention plans and functional behavioral assessments that come alongside the other supports that are provided for in an individualized education plan.
Thank you.
Michael?
Thank you for your presentation. I have a few questions. One, I'm a little concerned about a 72-hour time frame. That seems like an incredible amount of time that something could be happening. So I would like to see that reduced. My question a little bit is in your presentation, you talked about suicide and self-harm. It says that we refer them to a myriad of different folks, but one of them is the school nurse. I'm not sure that we actually have registered nurses on campus that have any sort of a psychological training. And what we've learned so often in suicide prevention especially is somebody who's trying to help oftentimes will say something wrong, not knowing because they don't have that training. So I'm a little concerned if we're referring them there. No disrespect to our nurses, and maybe they have all gone through some training, but I think both of those are more of a health aid, and that's not necessarily where a suicide person can go. And I do, in some aspects, agree with you on a second grader might not have the same threat potential as an eighth grader. But as far as self-harm, we're seeing this all the time. And unfortunately, I've responded to situations before where it was a second grader or younger. So I think we need to look at that and probably get trained folks in there right away. And that's not to say that I don't think maybe we should have all of our health aides go through some sort of training as well to be prepared. But so often, man, you say the best intended words are exactly what can trigger the rest of that to happen. So I would just question how we do that. when are the parents notified of one of these situations? Is that real quick? How long does that take? Only because my thoughts with this are maybe the fourth grader or fifth grader slipped up and said something, and it's a partnership with their older sibling or whatever. So we may not know the whole the whole thing. And as we learn a lot of times, most criminals get caught because they do something that is not the smartest decision they've made. We may find a lot of these out sometimes early on because somebody slips up and says something, but I think we need to get parents involved, and then at what point does law enforcement? So I'm just kind of concerned we have people here who are doing this threat assessment, but what training exactly do they have to do that threat assessment early on to determine where it goes? We have some questions. Who drafted those questions in your forms? Have those been signed off by law enforcement? Say these are all the right ones, or are we missing something that just is an honest mistake that we don't know because none of us do threat assessment at a law enforcement type level? So a lot of questions, but they're kind of all streamlined together. So maybe you could.
So maybe we could start with the very first question that we had of self-harm.
So with self-harm, I think it's a team approach, right? The nurse is one person to evaluate immediately if somebody has actually harmed themselves while at school. So if they need medical attention or something like that, I think that's really the intent to determine that has not happened. Where the partnership takes place is our school counselors are specifically trained to ask some specific questions, and then they are in certainly communication and have access to the outside agencies and resources that can provide the additional assistance. The second question, I believe, was related to how quickly are parents notified. Parents are notified immediately if there's a threat. So we obviously want to partner with the parents. The parent interview comes after there's a determination as to whether or not there's a threat that was made. So we ask those specific questions. I think the third question was, have we had these particular questions validated by law enforcement, number one, and number two, and number one is where did we get the questions from? So we researched several other school districts' questions that they have asked specific to this sequence of questions that are asked of students and parents both. Do I know whether or not it's been in alignment per se with law enforcement questioning? I don't, but certainly we can absolutely review that together with our law enforcement partners.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if there was another.
And that would be all three law enforcement partners.
Correct.
What would happen if they're not all in alignment?
Well, I mean, there are some threat assessment questions that they certainly can dig into when they're live and in person, right? At a student's home or a child's home that we wouldn't ask. So I wouldn't. I think the questions that we ask are school appropriate.
Okay.
And if law enforcement would like to, in their own threat assessment, should that be warranted, ask more, need I say, intrusive questions, they may be able to do that. And then obviously they share information that they can.
Mr. Todd, were they all answered?
Yeah, I just had a couple more. So this is mainly, though, just for students, a threat coming internally. This is not necessarily a threat that comes from the outside, a student at Buckeye High School or Detroit, Michigan, wherever they may come from. That happens on the internet. This is strictly internal.
That's correct.
Okay. So I had one more question. I just slipped my mind for a second. Oh, just a quick question. We did have a threat that we deemed to be fairly significant at one point. In fact, it resulted in the Rainbow Valley Elementary School being closed for a day, which I think is always proper to err on the side of caution. There was an email that came out that said Goodyear PD had recommended it. That's really MCSO's jurisdiction. So in here, are we identifying the right law enforcement agency that we should be working with? If we get one of the worst things you can happen in public safety, it sounds great, get everybody involved, but if you're answering to different masters, you may have a breakdown of communication. So was just curious if MCSO advised on that too, or if that was just a Goodyear thing because we didn't get support from MCSO, or how does that come to be? Because we're pretty unique having 3 jurisdictions. I don't know very many other school districts that have 3. Very few have 2, and we've got 3. So
Yeah, I wasn't seeking per se like action of what we should or shouldn't do. And when I spoke with our law enforcement partners, it was a sounding board to determine like, are we on the right track here? There's a, you know, it's a second partner that we have. And in that particular case, Goodyear was very clear with me that it is MCSO's jurisdiction. The principal of the school and MCSO and myself were collaborating ongoing. It was just about another thought partner to determine, you know, in this particular case, what would you do? And the only reason I say that in terms of partnering is because, you know, sometimes city municipalities have many more schools within them than, say, an MCSO. That's not to say that their process or procedures weren't accurate. And quite frankly, they were all on the same page with the action steps that were taken. It was just a thought partner.
So I would add that the example is not one that would go through this necessarily this threat assessment process if it comes from the outside. And in all of these, the law enforcement conducts their own, and they provide us with the information that they want, how that assessment is done. They provide that to us. And in that situation you spoke of, it also was a situation that had not been able to be assessed, and that's why we took precautionary. Had there been time to do that, we would have had a different result of whether we needed to close school or not.
no, and I appreciate the school being closed. I'd much rather close school for a week than close school for a week for other reasons. So certainly the right decision, I believe. Thank you.
Is there any other questions?
Mr. Guire?
Yes, Ms. Bixler.
Yes, I agree with Mr. Parks. The pattern of student behavior is really important to have at hand. Ms. Nettle, do we get any red flag warnings from students to add to our district from other places? Do we get any kind of statement from their sending district as to something to look out for?
We do. We ask 2 particular questions in the enrollment packet. Number 1 is, has your child ever been suspended from school? And number 2 is, has your child ever been expelled from school? This may come as a surprise to everyone listening. Sometimes that's not filled out correctly. And so one of the things that we have to do is we also seek records, right? So many times with student information systems that use Synergy, many of the time the academic records and the discipline records are with that. So we can easily determine if there are patterns of behavior or red flags that fall outside of the honesty or dishonesty of checking a box on a registration form.
Oh, great. Thank you, Ms. Nettle.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I had one more question, if I may.
Yep.
Do we have like a tip line or a way that we encourage students, if they know of something, to bring forth, or even the community to let us know?
We do. We've piloted a tip line, an anonymous tip line at Freedom for the first semester, and are getting ready to launch that tip line to the rest of our schools second semester.
So is that an email or a text or a phone call, or how does that work?
It's a text.
And that goes to a third-party group, or that's monitored 24/7 by our district? How would that work?
Our site administration, our technology supervisor, I receive them as well.
Okay, thank you.
The only question I had is listening to when a student transfers from out of district into our district. I just want to make sure there's no confusion of what is the definition, and I thought I saw it, of threat versus what is the definition of behavior issues. To me, a threat is, what I hear is bodily harm to themselves, bodily harm to the community, aka other students, staff, right? human beings, or, but then I hear about behavior issues, and to me, that's a whole different thing. Like, when you say that we look at those transfer papers, are we looking at threats, or are we looking at behavior? And then if we are looking at behavior, does the district target that student?
There's no targeting at all. I think the reason you may look for some of that information is to, in advance, provide some interventions and supports for students. Those two things are not related. So if there's a threat that comes through, it doesn't always equate to discipline, and vice versa.
Because it's my understanding that when it comes to discipline, that the public school system, we don't necessarily turn away children for disciplinary issues.
No.
Whereas maybe other forms of elementary education, they do that, and they do have that ability to do that. But it's my understanding that with public education, that by law, we're actually not allowed to do that.
The only exception is expulsion.
Correct.
Kids start with a clean slate with us when they come to us as a school, and unless there's expulsion.
And that would be any
student.
any public
Correct.
education district, correct?
Statutorily, yes. So, yes.
Thank you. If there's no other questions, are we ready for item 2.1?
Yes, we are.
Item 2.1, Teacher Advisory Group.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for making that adjustment to your agenda. I appreciate that. I'm Monica Landash. I'm the music teacher over at Estrella Mountain Elementary, and I have been a TAG committee member since 2018. So I've sat on that committee for quite some time. Just kind of telling you a little bit about us. So TAG is comprised of teachers from every campus, from every group, from every area of expertise, from special areas to special education to classroom teachers. And it's a vital stakeholder group that provides a lot of assistance to our district here. And I don't know which button to do, so I'm just gonna take a moment here. Thank you. So we were formed in 2015, and I took over for the lovely Amy Johnson. And pretty much the idea is that the teachers, we're quick to identify problems. That's our job. And areas that need attention and create a deficit in our ability to successfully educate our students in the classroom, and a multitude of tasks that we need to accomplish every day, or each school year for that matter. So we're natural problem solvers. It's what we do. And all day, every day, we're looking for, not only in our students, what are the issues, but how can we make the school day, our teaching careers better. And that's what this group does. It gives a voice to teachers in a unique way, and it assesses those needs of our campuses. So just really briefly, some of the things that we've accomplished as a team, you can go back and show off these lovely members if you want. Click. It's okay, we didn't coordinate this. So as you can see, these are some of our current members, and as we go through the year, people are nominated to be on the committee, and provided there's no nominations, we beg. No, every campus has at least 2 representatives, and we all come together and work on some of the issues that we see around our campuses. We're the boots on the ground. So we see the inner workings of district, campus, policy procedures in action. And some of the things that have been brought to the table are based off of those needs. Our admin does a lovely job every week talking about some of the things, but we see between the cracks sometimes. So the biggest thing I think, and that I was a part of, was creating the sick leave bank. We do get a decent amount of days and time, but you know as well as I do that so many things come up that you do not plan for, and that amount of time is just not enough. And that sick leave bank is a great way for our teachers to donate time that they've earned through their tenure in our district to people that may need it. And I've gotten to sit on one of those review committees and be able to help another teacher in need that ran out of sick days and needed time and couldn't afford the lack of compensation because they were helping their family. So we talk about things like that that are helping teachers personally. We look at things that are coming up that you guys are looking at as far as compensation that helps keep us here together. And we love that, and having that input I think is important. And we've seen a huge change in our teachers in necessarily what's important to them and what they value, and some of the things that we used to do, especially pre-pandemic, aren't doing this, or don't have the same impact with our teachers that maybe they used to. So it's a nice way to bring all those voices together. And I think either last week or the last board meeting, you guys were talking about how we have such a young population, or at least an inexperienced or less experienced teachers. And those voices and those ideas and the things that they're bringing to the table really are important voices. And they're not necessarily something that if you've been teaching for 15 or 25 years that you are aware of. So having all of us come together and look at those things and talk about, well, this is what my campus does. Oh, that's a great idea. Oh, we think that it's just a really great collaborative moment. So that's what we've done in 21, 22, 23. We've got a lot of things coming up as far as like, how do we have these beautiful signature programs. How do we bring everybody together and showcase us as a district? Other feedback that we need from the people in the room with the students. And that just kind of gives everyone another tool in their tool belt as we look at serving the needs of our campuses, our communities, and our students. So that's about all I have to say. Do you have any questions about TAG?
Ms. Bixler?
Yes, first of all, just thank you so much for being a part of the TAG team. That's so very, very important. We need to hear your voice, and I just can't tell you how appreciative I am that you guys spend that additional time and make sure that that voice is heard. So thank you so much. Can you tell me, as far as the each individual campus with their representative, how do I, as a teacher on those campuses, know who my representative on the TAG team is?
That's a great question. Our TAG, which we need shirts now, we TAG team. That's amazing. We reach out to our campuses, especially when it comes to questions that we need the group's feedback, or we talk about it in our professional development. We steal some time and address a need, and just to make sure that we are getting everyone's feedback before we present back to the committee. So email, surveys, and conversation.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Brian?
Yes, and thank you. I think it's great you guys are doing that. It's a great forum. I saw in here the TAG members. Do we have any administrators that join these meetings and teams?
Not typically. The district kind of coordinates it all so that we have a place to talk about everything. But it's primarily teachers, yes.
Do you have like a report that you provide for each agenda item? You know what I mean? How are each items handled within that meeting?
Oh, sure. So we have an agenda each week, and then we access different people, or so like if it's a question about human resources, Mr. Nuttall will come in and talk to us about the information, maybe the back information that we need to know before we go forward with something. And that really helped, especially when talking about sick leave bank, because there were a lot of budgetary issues, and like you can't be a first year teacher and give up time that you haven't earned, those kinds of things. So yes.
Okay, what about who decides what agenda items get put on the agenda?
These are all brought forth from the teachers. So we come together as a committee, and anything that people have upcoming or that needs some teacher input, it all goes on the agenda.
So you had, just for example, you said compensation.
Yes.
How did that come about? Did teachers actually bring that up?
Oh, for sure. Teachers are always worried about the bottom line. In Arizona, that is the number one thing. So when it does come to that, and when we hear like, oh, there's potential monies coming up, someone is always like, can we talk about what that might look like for us, and how we could be a part of that conversation, especially not having a teachers union. This is kind of that moment where teachers can say, we as a team have concerns, thoughts, and ideas.
I actually had a note on here that you guys have unionized the district. It was kind of a side deal.
You would know we'd have shirts.
Yeah, well, no, it's just something you kind of put together so you're collaborative. So it's you speak for a group of people as representatives.
Yes.
So I saw that and I get that. It was it just, there was a few questions I had on that, and actually you just answered the two I had left. So thank you very much.
Well, I'm delighted that I was able to do so.
Mr. Parks, I would also add that there are times when administration will put some items on the agenda also to gather feedback before we're doing something, so we can make sure we're doing it in the smartest way that involves most people and their perspectives. So it's really a two-way street of collaboration between district administration and our teachers.
Fair point. Yes, scheduling tends to be one of those moments. When we were talking about putting the same amount of time across the district, especially in like special areas, that was something that came up in TAG, so that each campus gets the same amount. Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Mr. Jensen? Nothing. Mr. Todd?
Thank you for coming. Always appreciate your presentations, whether they're musical and a bunch of students and you're in the background or here in front of us. So just a couple questions I have. Do you guys have like a general email that goes out to all the teachers to follow back up on
Like
status of meetings, or is that individual, is it isolated per campus of how they're communicating
each
back out to the
campus,
teachers?
each campus coordinates with their tag teams and sends out. So on my team, it's me and Josh Joyce. Josh Joyce typically sends out the email to everyone, and then Athena is there to take minutes and sends everything out so that we have a record of what we discussed when we approach that.
And then you notify teachers ahead of time of agenda items, or is there an agenda that's available for people to see?
So if there is an area where we definitely need to hear from everyone, typically either via email or when we're at our staff meeting is a time when someone will bring that up to their campus.
So as we've recognized now, we've got a lot of very young teachers. That's new for this district. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. New, fresh ideas is always great. But do you feel that the TAG team is made up of a good cross section? For example, I think about 75% of our staff, we see in another presentation, is first through third year teaching. Yes. So we have an agenda item later that comes up, and I look at that and I say, if the TAG voted one way, it might not be truly representative. So have we thought about setting, there's two per campus, but have we thought about saying one staff member should be 1 to 3 years and one should be greater than 10, or, and I don't mean to leave anybody out of that. Maybe we need 3 per campus, but does it truly give you a good cross section?
I would say that not as many members sitting on the committee are young teachers, and that's usually because of it's very hard to be a first-year teacher and then to take on a committee like that. But I do think that people like myself are mentors within their campus, so we are constantly communicating with people, and I think that is definitely something that we're looking out for, because those are our babies. We got to keep them in, so we need to be in touch with them to make sure that their voices are heard and that their concerns are being met, and that they do have a voice. And I think that is something that, while maybe they're not sitting at the table, they aren't being left out.
Great.
So I would add that the representatives are voted on, they're nominated and voted on by their colleagues at the school to be their representatives, and the TAG members have a responsibility to loop back out. So if a topic comes up and we say, go gather information, go gather some feedback and input, and we'll come back and we'll talk about it again the next meeting, where they've had a chance to go out and gather feedback. So some principals set aside some time during the early release days or an after school, before school meeting. Sometimes if it's shorter and easier, they might do something by email. So they've got a range of different ways to do it, but they're essentially representatives and voted on by their colleagues.
Appreciate that. Thank you. A couple questions. I was looking at your topics you cover this year, and it's extensive for 2021, 22, 23. What I'm not seeing on here, and we had a report last board meeting, it does not look like there's been a lot of discussion on the 4-day week or on morale. And we got a survey back that said morale was quite low.
Yes.
I would think that would be a very high priority for the TAG.
It's coming up, and I think that maybe morale in general isn't brought up as that specifically because it's not very productive to say everyone feels bad. So it comes up with the problems that we're facing, like what does it look like for duties? What does it look like for our schedules? What is the compensation? What are the solutions that we have for a multitude of problems that are directly related to morale, but not necessarily the morale issue. And I'm not sure why anybody hasn't brought up 4-day work week. I think we're kind of on board. So I think we're also waiting to see what that looks like in action.
I mean, we saw a survey and there were some teachers who really did not like the idea of a 4-day work week. So I just thought we'd see a lot more in this looking at it. But
it's a very new thing too, and it's hard to talk about it when nothing's been decided and now the decision hasn't been made. So we can go from there.
And I'm guessing you guys will look at professional development, how that will line up for you guys moving forward. It's going to be different. We're not going to have Wednesdays anymore. So I'm guessing quickly you guys will be providing some input back to us.
Absolutely.
So I would say that the teacher advisory group isn't really a committee of the board. It's really a committee of the superintendent and administration to have a working relationship and solutions. Some of those things do end up coming back as policy. Some of those things might show back up as a budget interest to come back up to be at the board level. But a lot of the things really are solutions that we work through administratively. So another example would be while we have a budget committee, we also always engage the teacher advisory group to see if they have any budget interests, to make sure those get surfaced for the budget committee to review and consider. And then that also bubbles up to, obviously, to the governing board, ultimately making all of those decisions. So if it ends up being a position change or a policy or a budget, then those become board agenda items.
I guess my concern, and I kind of admittedly I messed up at the beginning. I wanted to start by saying teacher voice is critical to us, and I went straight into the questions. I guess I went into test mode versus education mode. My concern sometimes is with the advisory council or the advisory group not being a board group, that things could be filtered in the past. And again, you hear me many times talk about, not necessarily today, but I look to what happened in the past. I look to what could happen in the future. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes that message in the past was very filtered. So we know it was very filtered. So do you think this committee, this group, be better served as a board committee?
I couldn't say it. I think that would be something that I would talk to the committee about. As an individual, I think that there is a little bit of autonomy in that group to not necessarily always be board policy related. Mm-hmm. Some of those things do come up. For example, when we brought forth the compensation for teachers covering classes, that came up to you. But then there's other things where it just ends up working its way out between ourselves, and it's not necessarily, I would say, board level, if you will. So I don't know, I think is my ultimate answer.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Okay.
I have no more questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
So when I look at the tag, the way that I see it, and I assume that it is, that tag is the vehicle for teachers on their campus to bring up topics that they would like to discuss. Would that be correct?
Yes.
Okay. At times, tag can also be used to get communication about, we need surveys, correct? Hey, let's get these filled out. It's more of a reassurance of, and I'm assuming, more of a reassurance of that if everyone fills out the surveys, that means teachers as a whole, their voice is heard at a higher percentage.
Yes.
Correct. Okay. And I got to say, Mr. Todd, that I find it unfortunate that there might be some bit of a suggestion that this administration would try and hide or, quote, filter issues out. I find that very unfortunate.
That's not what was said.
You would continue to bring that up.
It's not what was said. What I said is I'm looking for
believe you actually
future-proof
did say
issues.
that.
I
Point
said
Point
it's
of order.
happened in the past.
Stop it.
Okay.
Well, this is enough of this, guys. We're not doing this. Really.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And please watch your emails because we have upcoming events at Estrella.
Item 2.3, trimester benchmark data. Mrs. Jacobs.
Good evening, Mr. President and Board. I'm happy to present the trimester data to you, math and ELA. The 2nd through 8th graders took ELA, and the 3rd through 8th graders took math. First is a little snippet of our current rate. Each site's economically disadvantaged. Last year, Blue Horizons was not on there yet, so now you see where they lie. Rainbow and Freedom flip-flopped again. They've kind of been alternating the past few years. Otherwise, the pattern has remained. And this is just an important kind of snippet to reflect on as we go through the data, because the poverty trajectory typically is the same as the education and academic results. And so then that in turn creates opportunity gap, which we're constantly trying to battle and close up. So taking a look at ELA, this is a chart that shows at which grade levels, which sites increased their proficiency, and proficiency being those who scored in the proficient level and the highest distinguished level. So at 2nd grade, we were happy to see that all sites increased with the overall increase of 7%. Above 5% is a pretty good increase or decrease if that's what happened. So you'll see across the board at ELA there was many increases and many overall district-wide increases. The increase of 8% for 3rd grade and the increase of 11% was for 8th grade really stood out to us. Blue Horizons not having 6th through 8th grade last year, this year will be their baseline data. So you see that there's a little concern there with 5th grade ELA, except for Westar. Some underlying factors is that 5th grade and 6th grade current Lexile is lower than what it really needs to be right now. And so they're just going to need some time and also to speed up that Lexile so that they can comprehend those grade level standards. Nearly half of our 5th and 6th grade teachers do have lesser years of experience. So that is something we also need to look at. On the positive side, we know that our K-3 grade levels had explicit phonics instruction focus over the past 2 years. We know we had a focus and continue to have a reading interventionists at each campus. We also really hope that continues. And our teachers are accessing and using Achieve 3000 and Read Live to supplement reading. Some underlying celebrations in ELA that did not show up on the table, we dug a little deeper. We have some ELA cohort trends. So when I say cohort, that is the same group of students in 1 year who continue the next year. And so it's comparing those same students from 1 year to the next. So you'll see that the green is highlighting those celebrations. The bottom emerging level, we saw an increase in every grade level, and specifically, I think this is grade 4, it's kind of hard to see right there. ELA, each grade level, so across the district, is moving kids out of that bottom group, and then we're also moving more students from either the developing or proficiency level, we're moving them up into the distinguished group. So when we have movements like that, we know that teachers are making bigger impacts. They're being more effective and efficient with their instruction. The rigor is aligned. And we also know, reflecting on AASA and letter grades, that when we can move students out of our bottom group, they produce more points for their sites and then have more potential to score in those higher proficiency levels. Oops. This clicker's really fast. All right, for math, there were some increases, more site-specific than district-wide, as opposed to ELA, which you just saw. There are right now currently some decreases. It was interesting to see 8th grade have less of a decrease, but you will see that there were increases at some sites. So there are just more pockets to look into as far as what's going on with math. 3rd grade was a celebration. Sorry. Underlying factors. So nearly half of teachers with 1 to 3 years experience are at the grade levels 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. And if you look, I'm just going to go back one. If you look at that 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th, there were all decreases. So that was one trend that we saw looking at that. K-3 math has just recently became a focus because we had just finished with our ELA, early literacy focus. So right now we have Dreambox for K-8 as a supplemental resource, which students can use at their own pace, or standards can be assigned, lessons can be assigned. And it is now our current professional development focus, math is. Underlying celebrations in math. So for math, because we saw those decreases, we dug a little deeper, and we took a look at our students who performed in the spring AASA. So how did those cohort of students do in those grade levels? How did they end the year last spring, and how are they currently doing right now at the end of trimester 1? So 5th through 8th grade is showing an increase in the number of students proficient. So from last spring to now, they have more students performing at proficiency than at that time. We know that that was a cumulative test, and this is standard specific, but how those proficiency levels are ran and the psychometrics of that is, if our students maintained those levels without anything more done, they would end the year essentially at those levels. Our 8th grade group, so our last year 7th graders, shows an increase of students performing at the distinguished level. So we have more kids moving into that top level in math, specifically in 8th grade. We also dug into our trimester 1 cohort students. So how did our 2nd graders perform last year on the trimester compared to how did they perform this year as a 3rd grader? So over time, how are they performing? And we saw 4th grade, 5th grade, and 8th grade show an increase in the percent performing at the distinguished level. So we have students moving and growing in their math skills at that higher level. I'll just pause here to take a look at our overall celebrations. The red chart on top shows the sites by content left and right, and the grade level at which they have students above 50% proficiency. On the bottom is a chart with percent at each proficiency level, emerging being the lowest, distinguished the highest. In the green category is your percent proficient, you're proficient and distinguished. So on the top, in the spring, our district ELA was 40% proficient. Math was 27. Right now, if we just looked at specific standards of where we're at compared to how we ended last year, we were performing with more students in the mastery group so far. So it's encouraging because we've only had, at this point, 3 months, maybe even a little less of school. Digging a little deeper, we had questions, we dug in, and we're able to find answers to some of these questions and questions that we're still working on together. How are students performing at each standard level? The sites and grade levels also dug into that. You know, looking at those standards, do we need to look at pacing of standards? How are students doing nationally compared to how are Arizona students doing? And then how are we doing? If we are already seeing movement out of our bottom category moving up, or we're already seeing movement from proficient to distinguished, how do we continue that momentum? How can we provide any different or additional support to new teachers? Also in that new teacher category, we have a site that has an online math teacher. So some different unique kind of situations to look at. NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, just shared a report recently, and in mathematics nationally, it has still a negative trend since either COVID or pre-COVID. ELA took a dip while we're, as a district and in Arizona, we're right there maintaining. We know we're not the nation, but just keeping things kind of into perspective, that is a look at a little bit of data and research. We're continuing to look at standards at the standard level, looking at how students and sites are performing at standards over time to look at pacing. We also noticed that our specific reading it for information standards showed an increase, which is great because that's what our professional development has been focused on recently. And now I can take your questions.
Ms. Bixler?
Yes, Ms. Jacobs, thank you so much. And it appears to me that certainly the unpacking of the standards and the curriculum writing we've done in ELA, we're starting to see those benefits. There's no question. Congratulations on that. I really am excited about that. I'm also optimistic as we enter into the math because we still have the same issue going on where we're still unpacking and we're still writing curriculum and so on. I am concerned with the 6-7 decrease, but can you tell me in general, where are we as far as the amount of work that you're anticipating we do with the unpacking, curriculum writing, and math in comparison to what we've done with ELA?
Hi, Ms. Bixler. It's Erica Daniel. So our upper grades are more complete than our lower grades. They're more aligned to the LEDC instructional framework compared to K3. Does that answer your question?
Well, yes and no. So are you saying that in math, we have done that work? We've unpacked and we've written curriculum?
Yes, the standards are unpacked and we are writing curriculum. However, it is stronger and more thoroughly completed in the upper grades. They've had more time to work on it because we held off with K2, K3.
And so we're not reaping the benefit of that early introduction, that early intervention. As far as 6, 7, I know that we're looking at a support program that the students can voluntarily get involved with. Anything else we're doing there at 6, 7? Math?
Are you talking about Dreambox?
That was what was presented today, yes.
Yeah, that's not voluntarily. That's actually a supplemental program that differentiates math instruction for where the students are at.
Oh,
So it can
yeah,
accelerate.
I made that jump hearing that they, at their own pace, and I jumped to their own decision.
Anything else I can answer for you?
Do you think that will be enough?
Honestly, I think that is one tool that we're using. We're still working on developing teachers' content knowledge and pedagogy as it relates to constructing knowledge. Our upper grades have had the most professional development in teaching with the constructivist approach. It is our lower grade levels that we're really starting to beef up and monitoring and adjusting our professional development plan based on data, based on feedback from teachers, and based on feedback from administration.
Yeah, I know that we have inexperience as far as a number of our teachers on staff now, and I'm assuming that amount of inexperience also follows into those grades 6 and 7. Is that a correct statement, that we do have a significant number of our teachers with 1 to 3 years of experience in teaching that content?
I believe that was in 4, 5, 6. Okay, 4, 5, 6, 7.
And 7, okay, so that would be true. Okay, yes, thank you very much.
Mr. Parks?
Yes, thank you very much. It's very encouraging. I'm going to focus a little bit on the K3 phonics. It says explicit phonics. Can you explain that a little bit? What's explicit?
Sure. So explicit phonics instruction follows the direct instruction model, where you are modeling and explaining the phonetic rules, the sounds, how to blend, and then you're gradually releasing that to the students for independent practice.
And that's K through 3 at this
That
point.
is K3,
and
yes.
It says here for 2 years, so we started that right after COVID.
Yes, I believe that was one of the tools that they purchased to support teachers based on need and what they were requesting.
Right. So we're not using any other systems in K3, not queuing or balanced literacy or any of the other. We're sticking to the.
Well, phonics is one component of a structured literacy approach to reading.
Right.
So we still have a tier 1 reading program.
Which is?
Thank you. Sorry, it always escapes me. Wonders.
So that's the textbook resource we use, Mr. Parks. The explicit phonics is also based on brain research of systemic sequential processing of the language. So from the front of the word to the end of the word, and how those letters in context and the order that they're in, and how the brain processes those. So that's a sequential processing of the systematic phonics. But the other components of the reading program include the comprehension, vocabulary, and writing that all contribute to a full reading program.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm getting caught up on all this myself. I'm spending a lot of time reading and get caught up because as just a statement, I'd really like to see this board over the next year focus all the resources we have to getting these kids up proficient in reading, writing, and comprehension, because quite frankly, in my opinion, the rest of school goes right out, their education goes out the door. You have to have the ability to read, write, and have comprehension by third grade to reach those mastery, because you're never going to catch up. And we see it through math, we see it through everything. So I'd like to really push that this next year on this board, that we provide all those resources. I don't care what they are, we we need to do it. Now, what are we doing to get the catch up, to get the kids caught up? I mean, do we going to have some programs that are coming into 4th, 5th, 6th with phonics? What's the plan?
They are using a component of Achieve 3000, which is Word Studio, and that is their intervention component that addresses phonics gaps.
Okay. And I assuming there's a program to bring our teachers up to speed on this, because it is a very specific teaching style.
Right. There is training involved, yes. And we do have continuous training connected to explicit phonics instruction utilizing Reading Horizons.
Well, that's the best news I've heard all week. Thank you
Yes.
very much.
Mr. Parks, if I could also add, there is new legislation that all of our kindergarten through 5th grade teachers who teach reading will obtain their literacy endorsement. So the state, like you, is investing in making sure that we are adequately and even more than prepared to teach literacy at all grade levels.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
I would further add, we recognize that we've got 4th through 8th grade students, or really, that have not gotten this foundation. And so you're absolutely right, it affects them in math. It absolutely affects them on, like either science assessments. It's largely a reading assessment at the end of the day with explicit vocabulary. So it's, we're seeing that as, some budget interests that are being considered by the budget committee of, do we need math interventions? Do we need math coaches? Do we need 4th through 6th grade reading interventionists? Right now we have that resource that we've got for K3. And just how do those things play out to be potential supports where we can see the targeted needs and the subgroups of kids in our schools. So you'll be looking forward to having some options as we move forward with how best to use our resources.
Mr. Jensen?
No questions.
Mr. Todd?
Thank you. You got a little lesson in math and ELA putting this presentation together, so I commend you. A couple of questions. In your presentation, it talks about half the teachers only have 1 to 3 years experience. So are we doing anything in our professional development to provide different levels of training or different types of training to those new teachers versus those who, some in our district have been doing it for a very long time, and so they may not need the basics that maybe, and understandably, nothing wrong. They're new teachers. You can go to school all day, but until you get out in the world and really start doing it, I think this is when they really start learning. So are we differentiating professional development for that?
Our differentiating is through our new teacher induction program. So it's got a couple levels to it. One is a site level. So once a month, they have contact with their instructional coach, and they go over permanent topics for that month or content instruction. For example, around report card time, they go over entering grades into the system, what a parent-teacher conference would look like. So they do like all the 911s of education. When we go into a writing assessment, which we do, that emulates how AASA tests writing with a writing task, they make sure that they work with them aside from the whole staff so that they feel confident in administering that assessment. The other level we have is we have classes. And so our classes are once a month, and they are on Wednesday. So they're partly on district time and a half an hour on the teacher's time, where they can get instruction at their level. And the K2, K3, that's where we're really working on explicit phonics instruction connected to best practice teaching methods for our teachers. And then 4-8, they've worked on various topics, but most of them are connected to direct instruction or behavior management.
Thank you. One more question. On slide 13, it makes reference that National Assessment of Education Progress continues to show a negative trend in mathematics nationally, including Arizona. So my question is, we've changed the way we're teaching math. It doesn't appear like it's being real successful. So should we continue to teach this new trend that appears to be failing? How long do we ride this train before we say this isn't working and we need to go back to what was working previously?
I don't know if I'd say it's not working. I'm saying it's taking longer to catch them up. They fell further behind in mathematics and their understanding. And just speaking for our district, one of the things that we're learning is our students, because we really focused heavily on catching them up in reading and writing and ELA, that we weren't planting a solid foundation in some concepts. They need to be flexible and fluent in the upper grades to move a little quicker. So they're having to backfill some concepts to make sure those students have a strong understanding and then move forward.
Okay, thank you.
I have no questions. Thank you for your presentation. Item 3.1, Governing Board Updates. Ms. Bixler?
I have nothing to report.
Mr. Parks?
I have nothing, thank you.
Mr. Jensen?
Nothing.
Mr. Todd?
I'm going to complete the trifecta, I think, and say I have nothing.
Item 4.1, Guidelines or public comment. We have one. Ms. Kelly Zimmerman. If you could wait just a second for the clock to come up. There you go. You guys ready? Okay.
After you made the decision to change the educational direction for over 4,000 students 2 weeks ago with only 2 board members present in the boardroom, I hope you're paying attention to the response in the community. If you look at the reaction on the district Facebook page to the announcement, it wasn't positive. People are concerned about the education of their children, and they're concerned about putting adults before children, which is exactly what the 4 of you did 2 weeks ago. I think it's very interesting that not one board member asked Dr. Schuff during that meeting how she thought this decision would affect students' education. It was never about the students. And that's what your board members are supposed to do. According to the ASBA website, everything board members do is to be focused on providing the best education possible for every child in their community. And you failed at that. Now, next year, when test scores decrease, you need to look at yourselves and take accountability that you caused this. Not teachers, not administrators, not district personnel, you. When teachers still resign next year and doesn't solve the morale issue, you need to take accountability. When behaviors increase and students and teachers alike are frustrated with longer days, you need to take accountability. You voted for it. And before you suggest, again, that people work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I would suggest that you consider how you think that thought would affect morale in this district. Since it is apparent that you voted on a 4-day week to increase morale, it clearly seems important to you. I would ask you to consider how you think asking people to work continuously with no home work-life balance will affect morale in this district. Now, I'm sure at this point you're thinking to yourself, I'm so unhappy with this decision, why don't I just move my kids? Sure, that would be easier for all of you, but let me explain why that doesn't work. As some of you mentioned to me that you had not considered at that point how the 4-day work week would affect students with an IEP, which leads me to think that you don't have that much knowledge about special education. As I have stated before, I have a child with disability. And if I were to try to take that child to another district, they're likely to deny me. Because districts can only handle certain capacity for special education, and they're going to reserve that capacity for people living in their school district. So because children with disabilities do require more to access the education equal to their peers, and most districts don't have that capacity to take that extra time, money, personnel for children not living in their boundaries. So I cannot just pick up my children and move. So instead, I will stay here and I will advocate for my own children and the other children that did not have a voice 2 weeks ago when you decided to change the way they attend school and access learning on a consistent basis.
Have any governing board members have any comments they'd like to say? Okay. Consent agenda. Does anyone have anything they'd like pulled?
Mr. President, I'd like to pull 5.6.
Anyone else? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda with the exception of item 5.6.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda with the exception of item 5.6.
I'll second.
So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Paul?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
I'm also an aye. Show that it approved unanimously, and we'll move right into item 5.6.
Mr. President, I have a concern about the performance evaluation and some of the new language in it. Kind of at the top, just from a mission statement, are we still a college prep school, or are we looking at broadening what we're doing into looking at overall careers for everybody? I'm a little concerned. We're directing, and as every society and things are changing, maybe we need to focus a little bit more on trade skills or trades and how we better educate our kids and how we evaluate those types of education throughout the school district. The biggest thing I was concerned about is it appears that we're inserting DEI into our program without board approval or the board taking notice, so to speak. We have stuff in there about modeling equity, principal document subgroup, data to address inequities. We're getting into some real strange territory here. One of the more contentious areas I have is a section on engages in courageous conversations about diversity, provides formal and informal professional development to staff to improve their understanding of how their personal experiences inform their assumption about students and school community, corrects intolerant statements directed to individuals or groups, provides whole group undifferentiated professional development about working and supporting a diverse community, attempts to address intolerant statements, intimidate individuals or groups. My concern is who gets to decide what's intolerant? And as we go down this path, I think this is really going to create some more issues with morale. We get teachers worrying about what they're saying, how they're saying it. I mean, this is diving right into 2030 Agenda for Global Citizenship and SDGs. My concern is this is something that needs to be discussed in study sessions, discussed by the board, and make sure that we want to go down this path. I don't think we should include it at this point. I think that we need to put this off until the board has time to have a study session on it and discuss what we should do with the DEI program, because that's clearly what this is. So,
Mr. Parks, I'm not familiar with DEI, but I will say when the portions that are in red are the recommendation is to delete that language from the principal evaluation. So those are recommendations to delete, not add.
well, don't I feel like I have mud on my face?
We had some similar
Concerns. Well, there we go. I apologize. I was reading that and I was like, well, this seems like we're taking a step in a direction that's not healthy. So if that's the case, I apologize and we can move on.
Any other discussion on this topic? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve item 5.6.
Mr. President, I'll make a motion to approve 5.6.
So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Paul?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
I am also an aye, show that approved unanimously. Moving into general business. Item 6.1, discussion and consideration to approve the procurement method for construction of the district transportation facility and Liberty Road improvements.
President Aguirre, members of the governing board, we have potentially one project or split into two projects, depending on how you would like for us to proceed. We know you have an interest in what procurement method we use, so rather than preparing it and bring it to you to approve, we're seeking your input first before we do that back end work. The two aspects, overall, we have a new transportation facility. We are in the process of working with DLR, our architect, and that is part of a master plan for design for the overall use of the acreage so that we don't plop a transportation facility down in a spot that won't be useful to us when we need the land and used in a different way. And with that, we also have to do the improvements to Liberty Road per the city of Buckeye. And so we have the option of dividing those into two projects or keeping that as a single, much like we did with our new school construction, where we include the road improvements as part of it. So we've also invited Mr. Munch, a procurement expert, to join us today. I probably didn't use the proper titling for that, but so he is prepared. He can provide you with an overview or just respond to questions, but we didn't want him to do a full presentation unless you were seeking that information. So it's really just an opportunity for the board to discuss the various options and ask questions with Mr. Munch, and also Mr. David Schmidt from DLR, who's doing leading up our design work for the facility and has been engaged with engineers for the road construction. He would also be available to offer insight into procurement methods that would be supportive.
Ms. Bixler, your thoughts?
Well, just a quick question. It does appear to me that the specifics of each of those projects are very different. Building a road versus building buildings and so on. My question for Mr. Munch would be, is there one, because of the type of construction going on, would one form of that be more advantageous to us than another because of what's being constructed?
Board member, thank you for your question. We are looking at a very complicated project. If we're going to keep it all as one project, I would highly recommend we look at construction manager at risk as we did for the previous project. However, if we're going to split this out, I totally agree that there is the possibility of doing the road as just a hard bid. But now you're getting into the question of, is it a good idea to break up this project, or would it be better to keep the project together? These are things the board needs to consider.
Mr. Parks?
Yeah, I looked through it. I don't think there's any reason to separate this stuff out. And the construction manager at risk that we used the last time seemed to work very well for us. So my direction on this is keeping it all together under CMAR.
As your procurement advisor, that would be my recommendation. The more complicated a project is, the more CM at risk makes more sense.
Right.
Even the SFB that believes in hard bid knows that more complicated projects, they've approved the CM at risk process because it has so many advantages over the hard bid situation. Hard bid is great for your simple projects. This is not a simple project.
Understood. Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Jensen?
I'd agree with Mr. Parks.
Mr. Todd?
I agree as well.
So being the one who's in the industry, I guess I'm the only one who thinks that we build pharmaceuticals, we build power plants, we build a lot of different projects that are extremely much more complicated than a bus depot and a road at hard bid, but all for one and one for all. So I would like to also keep it together, CMR at risk.
I'm just looking quickly to see if that was a discussion or was that an approval. So hang on just.
It's approval.
It's approval.
Do you need to make a motion? Mr. President, I make a motion to approve the procurement method CMAR, construction manager at risk, for construction of a new district transportation facility and procurement for improvements to the Liberty School Road.
I'll second.
So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Paul?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
I am also an aye, show that it approved unanimously. Item 6.2, discussion of first readings policy KB, KB-R, GBGCB, IJNC, IJNC-R, IJNC-E, JFB, IJL, IJL-R, IMB, GCH, KDB-R, KI, KI-R, KI-E. Is there any discussion on these?
No.
Would anyone like anything changed?
Nope.
Okay,
Thank you. I will bring it back to you for a second reading.
discussion and consider, item 6.3, discussion and consideration to approve policy JLBC, second reading.
So with this, there was an adjustment recommended by Arizona School Boards Association with their policy advisory that came out later, and some further adjustment by our attorney. Again, it's tweaking at the end of the day, so just wanted you to see that those adjustments, and if you didn't have any questions, we can approve the second reading.
Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to item 6.4.
That one we would need an approval.
Yep. Says discussion in the agenda.
Discussion, consideration to approve policy JLBC. We're in 6.3.
Yeah.
6.3 says type discussion. There is no action item in type.
You know, what you're not seeing is the recommended action. Just to be clean, we can bring it back. It is in the agenda as discussion consideration to approve, but you are correct. So we can just bring that back to keep it clean.
Please.
Happy to do so.
Item 6.4, pursuant to ARS 38-41.03A3, the board may vote to hold an executive session to discuss and consult for legal advice with its attorney regarding superintendent contract. And with that, I'd like to make a motion that we go into executive session.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Paul?
Aye.
Brian? Paul?
Aye.
Michael? I am also an aye. All those opposed? Brian?
Nay.
Michael?
Nay.
Show that the motion carried and that we are going in at 7:08, yes. Sorry. I said it in my head, not out loud. Show that we came back into session at 7:29. We left off at 6.4, moving on to item 6.5. Discussion and consideration to approve $3,000 salary increase for certified teaching staff, special education teaching staff, and instructional coaches, and 6% compensation increase for other employees, all with half of amount due paid retroactive from service start date through December 22nd, and half equalized throughout the remainder of the contract term and revised salary schedule.
Mr. President, members of the board, first of all, I apologize for the longest recommended action in the history of board meetings. But I believe that that is summarizing what we're bringing forward this evening for your approval. In your board packets, I've provided revised salary schedules as we have on our website to reflect the recommended increase of 6%, as well as the recommended salary schedule, hiring placement schedules for our certified teachers and our instructional coaches and special education staff. In addition to that, I just wanted to make sure it was noted that it's a prorated amount from their service start date. So if employees started on their contract time, the retro amount would be in full of the half of the 6%. If they started after that, we've prorated those amounts, and those are identified for you in the salary increases per the staffing different groups of staff. So this evening we are recommending the approval as noted. I just wanted to also point out on January 1st, the support staff wage schedule incorporates a minimum wage increase. This proposed increase accounts for that. So all of those things are in consideration for your approval this evening.
Ms. Bixler?
Yes, just I fully support the idea that we're going to start this and retroactively make it part of the 22-23 school year. I love this idea. Just so I understand, with approval, this permanently changes our salary schedule? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Again, I'm in favor of that. The compensation, I like this, so I'm in favor of it.
Mr. Parks?
I think it's great we're able to do this for all the staff. I have one question. How did we come about the differentiation between the 3,000 versus the 6%? How did that take place?
As Ms. Landash noted earlier, they brought forward compensation components. The teacher advisory group brought forward those particular interests for compensation increases. And so when proposed in either at the time, what we were considering was a 5%. Either way, it's the same breakdown essentially. So the way that we equate essentially a 1% on the average is about $500 per employee. That's how we calculate that. And so the teacher advisory group, after polling and surveying their staff members, brought forward back the recommendation to administration for a split between at the time, it was $1,500 at a 5% and $1,250 twice. So one to be paid in lump sum in December here, and then the rest retroactive for the end of the year. So that was the teacher advisory group's recommendation at that time of 5%. We're able to bring forward to 6%, which is why you see the breakdown there.
Yeah, and for everybody's knowledge, so to speak, even mine, because it was a little rough where these funds were coming from. Can you explain where it's coming from?
Certainly. So the legislature, after the initial budget last fiscal year was approved, the legislature approved additional dollars, which was an additional component specific to annual daily membership. And so those dollars were available to us as a school district. And so our proposed budget adjustment is coming forward right now as a result of our recommendation based off of the override election and holding off to see how that might impact other budget adjustments.
Just no
et cetera.
override funds are being used for this.
That is correct.
Just to be
No.
clear.
These are all
Right,
annual
because-
daily membership funds.
Yeah, I
yes.
just want the public to be aware that this is a completely different animal, so to speak.
That's correct. Good,
right,
good question. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, because, and then, you know, as I was sitting down doing math, it was real evident why everybody picked $3,000. And I have a concern. My concern is once you hit the 50K mark, you're kind of shortchanging some people in the upper pay ranges who are tenured teachers. I don't like that. I think it sends a bad message. I think we should have, or that we should do the 6% above 50, because it makes everybody whole above that. Because here's the deal. How do you explain that, and how do you explain 6% for admin when you're not making the tenured teachers whole? I don't think that's okay. And I think we need to really, I don't know what we do here, but I think we need to look at it. The other thing is, I'm not happy that the board wasn't involved with this decision-making process, at least as a piece of it. We're put in positions all the time when there's a cut, where we're sitting out and having to make really bad, hard decisions, about who gets paid what. But when, it's turned around, it seems like it's kind of out of our hands. We don't get to participate in it, and we're just given a sheet says, well, this is what we're going with. I think that this should be, we should have had a study session, because we've talked even in the 4-day school week about, we have bus drivers, for example, we need to do more for. So I think there should be more input on this before we go through with this. I think there's some adjustments that need to be made. I think the teachers, the other piece of it is there is some room in the override for professional staff as we move forward, if I'm correct. Just so, I know we want to get this done, but why can't we give them 8%? I want to look at this deep and see what we can really do. I haven't had the chance to do that. And I want to make sure that our tenured teachers are taken care of. So
I would respond and say, I agree with you. So it's a kind of a philosophical decision. The district over time has either given a flat, I'm going to use the word flat, a percentage of increase. So for example, last year we gave a 2% increase and then a 2% stipend. Going forward, because we passed the override, we believe we'll be able to then just turn that additional 2% right into their contracts. And then if I go back even farther in history, when the 20 by 20 from the governor, the additional funds that came, we met with stakeholder teachers as well about around that very thing. And at that time, the teachers recommended that and I'm forgetting what the percentages were, so I may get this wrong, but basically we tiered by the number of years of experience they had, and those with the least number of years of experience got a lesser percentage of increase, and it's something like 5.5%, 6% increase, something along that line. And so the rationale at that time was that the people who had been here the longest may have had experienced some times in the history when there were very, very small increases given in those years, and it really was essentially to restore those teachers. So the two philosophical ways of doing it, it's essentially the same amount of money. I agree with you that typically I like to treat all the employees in the same way, right? So trying not to have this group is done this way, this group is done that way, try to do them all consistently. In this case, so anybody above the halfway mark, the halfway point for teachers, won't make as much as they would have with that percentage. Anybody at the halfway point below would make a little bit less with a percentage of increase. They'd make less money versus a flat rate for all of them. The reason for considering this as an option this time, where the history has been to reward the longevity teachers, is because of the ability to that when you apply that money now back to the teacher hiring schedule, where it looks like maybe we gave a 2% increase, we never see that 2% or 4% increase show up on the very first level. We have to reduce it down in order to make sure that we don't bring anybody in higher than where the people that were already in the system. So when we posed the option of more than one way to look at this is really philosophical, is do we want to have it be a percentage of increase that theoretically will reward our longevity teachers more? There's a good reason to do that. Or we do it in a way that will impact the starting of the teacher salary schedule from a recruitment standpoint. Which one, we keep trying to, how can we get to $45,000 as a starting salary? And we are limited when we continue to put it at the longevity part. So it really was a choice, and it wasn't necessarily a landslide at every school to say 90% of the teachers at each of the schools wanted one way. It was slightly more than half, really, at each school in favor of doing the flat rate, and then at all the schools coming back, the feedback was to do it at the flat rate in favor of the recruitment aspect of things. Or they may have just been thinking, hey, I think that might help me in my situation a little bit better. However they interpreted, that was the feedback we received. In terms of an option like anything else, if the governing board this evening wanted to say, have that be 6% for our teachers, we can make that adjustment very easily and we can implement that. So you still have choices in how to do it, but we, like anything else we do, we bring back input from the staff. You've gotten input as a board on budget from the budget advisory and did not use their prioritization. You did something different. So in the same way, if you want to this evening do something different, you certainly can.
Can you tell me what the downside, I can't see any, you obviously would know more than I do, why we can't do a hard break at 50 grand and do 6% up all the way through admin? Why can't we do that? Because that gives both sides of the benefit.
Well, because we're working with a finite amount of budget, so we took the amount of money that would be, so again, the answer is not, we can't do it. It's just saying the reason why is we took, let's say you have $100 to give out, and we could give it as a percentage to everyone, and the bottom ones make a little bit less and the top ones make a little bit more. It still comes out to be the same amount of money that was spent in the budget.
I understand that, but then, so what I'm asking is what is that? Because here's my concern, and you should remember, people are watching. Mm-hmm. When we sit there and we're basically not providing the maximum amount that we can give to our seasoned teachers, and we're showing a 6% raise for administration, which a lot of people are making six figures, that just sends a really bad message. And I mean, I'm coming from the standpoint, if we got to take a point or two out of admin to get our teachers up to where we need to be, so be it. I think we need to take another look at this, and I think it's a little more complicated than just coming up with a number right this minute. We can make this retroactive next meeting. So I'd like to dig into this. I'm asking that we dig into this a little bit, come up with some ideas, because we just don't have the time or the resources to do that right now.
We can do what the board would wish us to. We certainly can.
How does our admin salary schedule compare? Are we competitive in that area?
I don't know that we've done a salary comparison, but go ahead, Mr. Nuttall.
I would say that we're competitive. We haven't, in particular, kept up with percent increases over time with admin, and I mean over the last 10 years or so. I would say that since we started to provide percent increases across the board and not per se stratify them, one of the things that we're looking at trying to do is we look at daily rate. I've talked a little bit about this before. And when our highest end teachers are making considerably more daily than our administrators at a school, that also creates a little bit of an inequity in terms of daily rate. So while the overall salary may be considerably higher The daily rate is not, but the number of days worked obviously is a significant discrepancy. 260 versus 185 as an example. So that is, we are competitive. I would say that we're in the ballpark. And with these percent increases, we've become more competitive over time.
So I would add, when we did the essentially 20% from the additional, so we did not provide 20% increases to administration. We did not provide 20% increases to support staff. There were some jumps in there, but nowhere close to 20%. Just like last year, we did 4% for teachers, but we did 2% for administration. The competitive with other districts, that's one aspect. When he talks about the difference in daily rate, when we have a succession planning and we try to move from a teacher, say, to an instructional coach to an assistant principal or a coordinator, if that's not a jump up to work the extra 60, 80 days, I guess 80 days, if you do the math, then it's not worth it to go into administration, because they're going to essentially take a cut in pay per day to do that. So as a system, it's important to try to keep that framework going, so we don't have the compacting like we struggled with, say, on our support staff wage schedule. So I would just say yes to what you're saying, and then here's some additional information that adds some complexity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think because a lot of the times the administrators don't get the same pay increases as the teachers, and so I think we've been a little bit shortchanging them. So I'm okay with that 6% and 3,000. The teacher advisory group also agreed with this 3,000 across the board, correct?
They were looking at 2,500 at the time, and I will say that there were longevity teachers on there who were coming back representing what their teachers said, and they themselves probably would have individually voted for the 6%. They just came back with saying, what did the majority of people on their own staff say?
I think that's a good indication that, like we just said, the teacher advisory group is not made up of those rookie teachers. And so many of them probably made that recommendation against their own self-interest.
I would say to Mr. Parks and the entire governing board's interest, and administrations as well, is what can we do to get, particularly that starting salary up and the ability to attract even longevity teachers. We share that interest. So, that's something also with the budget interest coming forward, is any dollars that we have in our budget going forward, is there anything else we can do to continue to study this and think of some other creative solutions to that end?
Mm-hmm. I would look at this as here's this, and let's look at what else.
Mr. Todd?
A couple questions, and at the end, maybe a suggestion. How many teachers in our district? I believe our starting salary now is $41,900. Does that sound about right?
It is.
Okay. How many teachers currently make over $51,000 a year in our district?
I don't have that particular answer at my fingertips.
Okay. My thought behind that is this 3%, it's about a 7% raise for those at the minimum, $41,900. Top tier teacher, I think our top is somewhere around $72,000. It's a 4.1% raise. So they're really getting shorted, and we should be valuing those teachers with longevity. A couple things. I wonder what it would cost to pay teachers making over $51,000 a 6%, and the teachers under $51,000 could get a $3,000 across the board raise. This, if my math tutor was right in helping me with this, would equate to more than 6% compensation increases, 6% to all staff. Yet our most valued teachers, we've been with the district for a long time, would only be valued at a $3,000 raise. So although this was voted on by the teacher advisory group, I think it's important to know that almost 50% of our teachers have 1 to 3 years experience. So I think we're running into a situation we run into in the country with the kind of the way the votes are. Is it a popular vote, or is it the voting system we do to allow fairness across the entire country? I'm wondering if we shouldn't look right now. If we approve anything tonight, the retroactive would be paid before Christmas. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I think there's nothing more important than to help teachers and staff get a little more money before Christmas. But I would like the board to entertain the idea. I think everybody's going to get at least $1,500 out of this raise. That we authorize a $1,500 payment now, and we come back after the first of the year, and we dissect into this and look and see if we can do even better than the current, and then have an equitable plan for everybody. We're essentially, with a flat rate increase, we're kind of giving a pay cut to our top teachers, and I don't like that. I don't like taking away. We're in a real unique situation here. Our senior teachers are very important to us, but make no mistake, those brand new teachers are critical as well, because we would not, let's face it, we wouldn't have a school district without those new teachers, without the old. I think we're in uncharted water. But I would like the board to at least consider that we do a $1,500 payment prior to Christmas. If staff feels that everybody would make at least $2,000, we could go to $2,000, and get that out before Christmas, and then come back after the new year and dig into this, and kind of to Mr. Parks's point, can we do 8%? Can we do something different that gets everybody at the bottom end close to that $45,000, but at the same token takes care of our top tier teachers who have been with us for a long time, and they've struggled with us through a lot of times. So I would like to propose that.
So to clarify, are you talking about the same budgeted amount? Because anyway, I think you're still looking at one model or the other. Essentially is everyone will either get a flat rate, or everyone will be given by a percentage of increase. So I think you have the ability to vote on that tonight if you wanted to. If you want to go with percentage of increase, you can. There's good reason to do it that way. So it's not a bad thing. Either way, we are giving our employees compensation. We're just coming forward with what that recommendation is. If you're talking about a situation where we use the budgeted amount, and then we find, the idea of finding some additional money for the people that make more than a certain amount, or have more than a certain number of years of experience with the district in some way, that's kind of an added budget amount that we would need on top of what we have right here already being distributed. So I would be a little bit concerned about that. Not that it can't be done, but I'd like to see how our enrollment plays out to make sure, because we're holding some back to make sure that our enrollment meets what we budgeted to with our enrollment. So we've done it give as much of the money away as we can with this, but still being conservative enough to make sure that we are balancing our budget by the end of the year.
And I agree with Jensen's points of we have lacked a little bit of trying to send as much money as we possibly can to teachers, to support staff, and have somewhat laxed a little bit on administration, if you will. I think it's important to recognize it. There's no perfect answer when it comes to things like this, but I appreciate that teachers, or TAG, as Mr. Jensen stated, that it seems as though they did what they felt was best for the district as a whole, rather than looking out for their own self-interest. And I think that says a lot about the district as a whole itself and the employees. So if there's no other discussion, I'd entertain a motion to approve item 6.5 as it's presented.
Mr. President, I move that we approve item 6.5 as presented.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Brian?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
I am also an aye, show that it approved unanimously.
I'd like to explain my decision. I voted aye so I can have the option of bringing these up after the first of the year for review.
Item 6.6, discussion and consideration to approve assistant principal at Freedom Elementary School as 1.0 FTE.
Mr. President, members of the board, Freedom Elementary is comparable in enrollment to Rainbow Valley. In last year, each of the two schools shared an assistant principal, and this school year, we've had enrollment increases as well as some additional self-contained special ed programs at Rainbow Valley, and so that position was dedicated as a 1.0 to Rainbow Valley. What happened was at that point in time, based off of budgetary considerations, there was only 0.5 available at Freedom Elementary. So currently, the assistant principal there is on a 0.5 contract. The recommendation this evening is to bring that 0.5 assistant principal contract up to a 1.0. And the budget impact from here until the remaining part of June 30th is just a little over $20,000 plus the employee-related costs. So the maintenance and operations budget with the additional state funding, as we're talking about here, can support the added expense. One of the things that we've experienced at Freedom Elementary is they've had an increase in enrollment, but they've also had an increase in needs for support in other items that are beyond just enrollment, disciplinary issues that have come forward, additional supports that an assistant principal full-time can provide, as well as additional special education programming at the school. So that's why we are bringing this forward this evening for approving Mr. Velasquez to go from 0.5 FTE to 1.0 at Freedom.
Ms. Bixler, discussion?
I have no questions. I'm fully in favor of this.
Questions? Brian, Paul, Michael?
No, I would just say I've long thought we need to have an assistant principal at every campus, so this gets us one step closer to that.
All right. With that, I'd entertain a motion to approve item 6.6.
I'll make a motion to approve item 6.6, assistant principal at Freedom Elementary as a full-time employee.
Second.
So I have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Paul?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
I am also an aye, show that it approved unanimously. Item 7.1. Board comments, agenda topic requests. Anyone have anything?
Yes, Mr. President. I agree with Mr. Parks. I think it's time that we have a discussion philosophically of where we want to target our salary schedule. I understand exactly what Dr. Suff is talking about. I've seen districts that really want to bring in new teachers, and so they target the front end. I've also seen those that want to honor and keep their experienced teachers, so they backload. I think it's a good time to have that discussion. I don't think it needs to happen right away, but as we enter into the discussions on budget for next year, I think we need to have that discussion. So that is my topic.
I'll second that.
Absolutely.
Another topic, in the past, we've done a superintendent kind of performance review in December, just to check and adjust on where we're going with the goals and where that's at. Typically done in executive session since it is regarding performance. I'd recommend we do that in December. In the past, we've invited the oncoming board members that will be coming in January into that discussion, since they will be a part of that. But that would be my recommendation.
I can support that.
I have one request. I see our first meeting and its reorganization study and regular on the 9th. I would recommend we break that out to a reorganization meeting on January 2nd, even if it's virtual, but we need a reorg meeting prior to the study session and regular board meeting.
I can support that. Can I ask for clarification as well what the study session is for January 9th?
Are we on the upcoming board agenda items? If we are.
Yes, upcoming board meetings.
All right, so can I speak to that? Does everybody think I'm on topic if I do?
I believe so. It's about that.
All right,
As long
thank
as
you.
It's already set.
Study
so-
session for budget. Study session for budget.
Okay. So I definitely think we should do our reorganization meeting prior to that night.
So it's my understanding that there were actually already are two separate meetings,
Yes.
that we have an organization meeting at the very beginning on January 9th, and then you come out of the organizational meeting into study session, regular board meeting. That's always been my understanding, and I thought there was a big to-do about that last year. And I thought as a board, we all agreed that those are actually two separate meetings.
I think they are two separate meetings, but I believe the suggestion is to move the reorganization meeting to January 2nd. That allows, if there is a change of leadership on the board, that allows the new president to work with the superintendent to define the agenda for the study session and the regular board meeting, which is part of our policy. There's no way that they could do that on the same day.
I don't see the theory behind what you're saying. Obviously, there must be something getting ready to happen in January that maybe the board and the district at this time knows nothing about. I thought that in January, again, that there was a agreed upon way that we were going to go about this. I thought that there was compromises that were made, but apparently now that we're coming to it, that the those compromises and the integrity of that particular meeting that we all had aren't going to be honored? Is that what I'm hearing?
I don't think that's what you're hearing at all. It's just as far as setting a regular meeting, the board president has to approve it. This was the discussion we had last year, and we finally said that it was going to be, the organizational meeting had to be before that. We didn't stipulate how far before that, but it has to be far enough to where whoever the new president is has the ability to approve the regular meeting with the superintendent. And that's not the past one, it's the current one. So it's policy.
So, because the January board meeting is actually finalized in December, which is still in the term of a past president, whereas the February meeting would be for the January approved president to take over those policies at that point. Because then again, when you come back to the January meeting of 2024, for me personally, I don't see why you fix something that isn't broken, in my own opinion.
It's not only policy, it's out of respect, because again, it's about,
I don't think we want to bring up respect based off of what happened last January.
you always have to go there, don't you? We're trying to do this in the right way. I tried to last year. I know I got a little out of hand, but I've been on boards my whole life. I know the process. We just did a whole legislative district meeting, and the organizational meeting was held 2 weeks before the regular meeting. This is how it's done, and it's done protocols for a reason. We haven't been doing it right forever. So
I think that's your opinion.
it's not an opinion, Mark. If you go out and go into any structured board
already-
meeting and organizational that happens annually, that's how it's done.
I think we've
And I don't see a downside, honestly, in doing it the week before. We have to do it before anyway. And you know, the reality is, I mean, you realize the new president come in and kill the whole thing after the organization meeting. You know, I mean, it's just, let's get the org done out of the way. That way the new board president can work with Dr. Schuff, make sure that the agenda is what the new president wants and it's laid out the
Actually
way.
not what the new president wants, Mr. Parks. It's actually what the board as a whole wants.
No,
And in
Mark, you
actuality-
approved the agenda.
In actuality,
You approved
it's
the
the board
agenda.
president who listens to
I
the board
understand
as
that.
a whole
But the-
to ensure that the board as a whole, their wishes are being implemented
The
onto the
board
agenda.
president always approves the agenda.
Mr. Jensen?
Could I just make a point of order that we do have another meeting before that? And so maybe we could break from the conversation and in the next December meeting, continue the discussion or see if we can get to better resolution.
So would that be a board topic, I'm assuming?
It might be a good item on the agenda to discuss.
Any other discussion on the meetings?
Just my recollection of the discussion we had about having the reorganization meeting prior to the regular meeting, that's how I remember the discussion, that we have it before. In my experience, I have seen many, many board reorganization meetings. I have never seen one that was a week before. It was always right before the regular meeting.
Thank
And that's
you.
been my experience.
So,
No, I don't have I think Paul's idea is not a bad one. Let's put it on the agenda.
item 9, adjournment of the meeting.
I would like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor? Paul?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
I am also an aye. Show that we adjourned at 8:08.